Hello guys, it's Tanner here. As you may know me on Instagram, Proletarian Stoner 1946, and I'm making my first YouTube video to explain Hoxism, Albania, and the culture and state that was quite possibly the best example of socialism we've ever had. So just sit back, enjoy it, and hopefully you enjoy the video. So, what is Hoxism? Well, in brief, it is the analysis of tactics for the preservation of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the anti-revisionist and anti-social imperialist struggle of the proletariat, as well as the identity and the nature of finance capital, which is, in the modern imperialist context, provided a new analysis and answers to fight this international oppressive stage of imperialism. So, we come to the question, what is the historical international nature of Hoxism? So it is to defend the struggle of socialist construction against revisionism and to fight the restoration of capitalism. For its doctrine of liberation from fascism and transition to socialist revolution, it is the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the building of socialism in a feudal and backwards country. Hoxism is the teaching of achieving full socialism by relying on your own forces and successful struggle of breaking through the capitalist encirclement through this contributing self-determination theory. Hoxha proved Lenin's theory right when it came to showing that even a small country can be the world center of revolution if its national question as well as its identity on all fronts are found under Marxism-Leninism. So, his contributions include his approach to revolution, as I will explain, self-determination, cultural revolution, and the analysis of finance capital. As Enver Hoxha himself said, the leadership of the proletariat and the masses by the party is successfully achieved only when the party has a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary inspiration, and not an equivocal inspiration with 100 meetings with 100 flags. And its action, the Marxist-Leninist Party of the genuine socialist country does not proceed only from the interests of its own state, but always takes account the interests of the world revolution as well. So now, we will start off with the revolution of Albania. Now we're on the revolution and the conditions pre-revolution. Let's go on to those. They were feudalist in 1944. They had the intervention of fascists in 1939, with Italy being the first that they had to fight against. The Communist Party was created in 1941. November 8th, it became the Party of Labor of Albania. It was liberated in 1944. It gained independence in 1912 from the Turkish Empire. And it was led by Enver Hoxha, fully liberated on November 29th, 1944 from fascist occupation. Now, the revolution of Albania went through three separate stages. Now, the first stage, the basis was laid for a general uprising of the National Liberation Army. In this stage, the guerrilla units, regular setas, and battalions, and also the volunteer self-defense units were set up, and the general preparation was set up. Sorry about that. The second stage, the war was turned into a general uprising in the centralized NLA, which had about 70,000 men by 1944. The partisan brigades and groups were formed as well. The military administration in the rear was also set up. In the third stage, the general uprising led to the expulsion of the occupiers, to the liberation, to the wiping out of reactionary organizations and armed forces, tools of occupiers, to the destructions of the state apparatus. The uprising began in cities and spread to the countryside as the main focus, aiding the peasants as a force and then growing further in the cities. Now that we've gone over the revolution, let's talk about some of the accomplishments that happened as a result of this revolution. They were fully electrified in 1970. Industry contributed to the national income with about 66% in 1986, where in 1938 it was only 6%. Illiteracy was at 90% in 1938 and 0% in 1956. Industry in 1985, Albania produced more than 40 types of raw materials and minerals, along with agriculture reaching 90% of raw material needs. Heavy industry produced all the equipment, light industry provided 85% of the consumer goods. With total industrial production being 422 millions of lek in 1950 to 16,082 millions of lek in 1985. Taxes were at 92% in 1946, 12.6% in 1950, and only 0.1% in 1969. It was abolished by 1972 completely, to where citizens didn't have to pay rent or any of the taxes or any of those kind of dues whatsoever, which is pretty cool. The wage ratio was only one to 1.5 for the average lowest to highest wages. Now, to put that in perspective, Albania was had the lowest wage ratio in the world during their socialist construction, which is amazing considering that America's wage ratio is at 354 to 1. Kind of cool how it can keep the gap. Now, to explain in further detail the accomplishments of Albania, we must look at the economic revolution. In this revolution, in the economic field, there were two main objectives. First, resulted in the elimination of landowners and bourgeoisie. Private ownership was abolished, and social ownership became the main relations of production, both in town and country. Second, the backwardness and one-sided structure was liquidated and replaced by a multi-industry structure, including hydroelectricity, to which they were the fourth highest producer in the world with hydroelectricity. By means of nationalization, the big and medium capitalist property was liquidated and replaced with worker ownership through the DOTP. This was achieved based on expropriation without compensation. The private property of small producers were collectivized for the peasants, and in this process, the material technical base of large-scale industry using high rates and rhythms was socialist. And in 1976, the land was fully nationalized, with peasants receiving 50% of the land for development of agriculture as well as light and medium industries. And now that we've talked about some of the accomplishments of Albania, let's talk about the economic model itself. The Albanian socialist economy was characterized by a high and stable rates rhythms of development, by a vast activity of research and rational development of the resources. This planned economy was actually formed by Joseph Stalin, who, in the economic problems of the USSR, identified that the rapid rate of development of heavy industry was the catalyst which spurred growth in the Albanian economy. He is quoted as saying, "The fast rhythm of the development of industry in general and of the production of the means of production in particular constitutes another principal factor. The key of industrialization and transformation of the whole of the people's economy is the basis of a socialist development." And now that we've gotten an idea of the model of economy that Albania had, let's look a little further into it. To sum up Albania's socialist economy, there was characterized by five specific components as identified by Stalin and carried out by Hoxha. Let's get into those, shall we? First, it was the simultaneous and harmonious development of industry and agriculture, considering the fact that industry, as the leading branch of the economy, was the basic branch of the economy. In this stage, the link between industry and agriculture were needed to maintain each other, and since agriculture needed to be built, we should take the advice of Stalin, who told Hoxha, "The peasantry must not leave an inch of this land unfilled. The peasants must be persuaded to increase the area of arable land," which, under Hoxha, who carried this out, in 1957 irrigation canals were built which irrigated 97,000 hectares of land, and a 338% increase from 1938. And there was also a big real land reclamation, which by 1955, 52,704 hectares of land were reclaimed, which is 10,541% increase from 193 in 1938. The total area of arable land increased from 391,000 in 1950 to 713,000 in 1985. The second component was the priority development of heavy industry, which is the heart of socialist industrialization. The entire strategy for this under the planned economy was that heavy industry was produced as the means of production, which resulted in development of various branches such as metallurgy, which was one of the cornerstones of machine production, and self-reliance, if you really think about it, but I go into that a little bit later. The third was the rapid rates of development, which I did explain a couple of minutes ago. Fourth was the development of industry in those directions, was guarantee and strengthen the principle of relying on our own forces. To go further into that, this was based on self-reliance, as Hoxha put it. Our party has defended and defends the principle that self-reliance is not a temporary and conjunctural policy, but an objective necessity for every country, big or small. This development drove the self-reliance and independence under the advice of Stalin, who also said Albania must march on its own feet because it has all the possibilities to do so, which is a very good compliment from Stalin, as he was, very supportive of Enver Hoxha. The fifth and final component was the priority of heavy industry while not neglecting the light and consumer goods industry. Heavy industry was usually located near the source of raw materials and the source of a large workforce to sustain the large enterprise. A different approach was taken in light industry, though. This was placed in all districts as to not neglect any other districts, which resulted in a backward district. They were brought to levels of, to where the cities were. So basically, the light industry was used to propel the countryside and other districts that were poor before to be on the level of the cities, which is a great development. Now, as mentioned before, it turns out that Stalin's analyses were correct. Some other important factors that were shown in Albania were on the questions of profits, reproduction and production, the social and technical division of labor, as well as the relations of production itself. Now, since Hoxha was a Marxist-Leninist, he approached the building of socialist Albania on these analyses of Stalin, Lenin, Marx, and Engels. But as more specifically to Stalin, what were a few of the analyses that he gave that were actually very important to the Albanian economy? Well, I will give you those right now. One of the discoveries of Stalin was the need of the necessary and surplus labor. His analysis on that was the following. I think that we must also discard certain other concepts taken from Marx's Capital. Whereas Marx was concerned with the analysis of capitalism and artificially applied to our socialist relations, I am referring to such concepts among others as necessary and surplus labor, necessary and surplus product, necessary and surplus time. Marx analyzed capitalism in order to elucidate the source of exploitation of the working class, to surplus value, and to arm the working class, which was bereft of the means of production, with an intellectual weapon for the overthrow of capitalism. It's natural that Marx used concepts which fully corresponded to capitalist relations, but it is strange to say the least to use these concepts now when the working class is not only bereft of power and the means of production, but on the contrary, is in the possession of power and that controls the means of production, hires itself, sells its labor power to itself. It's just strange to speak on it now. It's just strange to speak now of necessary and surplus labor as though under the conditions of labor contributed by the workers to society for the extension of production with the promotion of education, public health, organization of defense, etc. So with example of the economic facts I gave earlier on Albania and what I'm going to give a little bit later as far as the worker freedom and all that, we can conclude that Hoxha's model was guided, in fact, by Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin. More so Lenin and Stalin because they gave more contributions to Marx and Engels. But we can also conclude now that Albania had eliminated the wall of the appropriation of profits to either the individual laborer or the societal labor to find the interrelation between the two, thus eliminating the exploitation and changing the application of surplus profits to profits which goes to the state, and the proletarian can eliminate taxes and rent, which Albania did by 1976, mandated by the Constitution of the same year. Now how they appropriated profits was based on Stalin's analysis as well, which was actually a furthering of Marx's theory of profits. The analysis in which he pointed out that profits are important in socialism, being that it is the only way to control productive activity in a socialist enterprise. He approached profits as profits for society in terms of the whole apparatus. This became why unprofitable industries can also exist and thrive, understanding that they are indispensable to socialist production and make it possible for the reproduction and extended production possible. Further, Stalin analyzed that non-productive sectors like education are also indispensable for the future development, and the same with the military. So Stalin concluded that profitability is to some extent useful to determine the effectiveness of each enterprise from the view of an independent productive object, but it is not the element that determines the way of process of extended reproduction of the socialist economy, and it also doesn't determine the way labor flows back and forth among the different sectors, the so-called regulators of proportion. Thus, as Hoxha carried out, that social labor is meant to meet the growing needs of society. Now that you've gotten the breakdown of the economy, now it's not a complete analysis, but I am going to post links to certain researches. Like there's an essay, there's a research paper done by the University of Tirana. I have a few essays that go deeper into some of the points that I had posted earlier, which I will post in the link in the description below. And I mean, I also have other posts and stuff that go even further into this, but I'm just trying to address the main the main parts of it so where you guys can understand that A, he was a socialist, B, he wasn't dogmatic, B, he carried out Marxism-Leninism to the fullest, and he, was a great communist leader. So, which is the whole point of this video. So now that the economy has been addressed, we will look at the second stage of Albania's socialist construction, which is the Cultural Revolution. In the mid 60s, there was a deep concern for the rising bureaucracy. People complained about inflation and other economic hits that had happened, which does happen, over time in an economy. There are going to be, the ebb and flow and the dips in the economy. So, as a result, Hoxha called for his own cultural revolution, which, by the yearning of the masses, under his CR, military ranks were abolished. He reintroduced political commissars to the military and renounced professionalism. To rid the white-collar mentality, salaries were slashed from mid to high-level officers. He ousted administrators and specialists from their desk jobs and sent them to toil with the proletariat in the factories, among society, so that way they can rid the bureaucracy, which he was very against and gave a lot of contribution to as well. It showed that he wanted the party to be of the part of the masses, and he made extreme goals to get there, and it did in fact do this. And also in ridding bureaucracy, 6 ministries were abolished. The government attacked dissident writers and artists and other media. Obviously, he reformed education and reinforced isolation to keep out European culture to maintain self-determination, which was to an extent a mistake because it did cause a stagnated economy in the 80s because they didn't evolve, to accept things from the West so that way they can, prosper, which is the biggest mistake. But given the time and the capitalist encirclement that he had with, Greece and Italy and all of Eastern Europe, Mao, Khrushchev, and all the enemies of Marxism-Leninism that there was, the isolation, they can't really blame him too much. It's just like the bunkers. He did go a little too much, but that doesn't make him like an ultra paranoid guy because he didn't do this until like the late 60s. But he did it in retaliation to threats of invasion from Khrushchev, from aggression from Yugoslavia, from, Greece and Italy and, all that. So, given the context and the fact that he was Marxist-Leninist, he wouldn't change it, which is great, and he fought for it as hard as possible. He had to do it pretty much to preserve the self-determination and independence and, so forth of Albania, which is amazing. Now onto religion. In 1967, the authorities conducted a violent campaign to extinguish religious life in Albania, claiming that religion had divided the nation and mired in backwardness, which is historically accurate because religion does in fact do that. Now, despite complaints from within his own party, all churches, mosques, and other religious institutions were converted into warehouses, gyms, or workshops. It ended in Albania becoming the first atheistic state. Now, my opinion on it is, I mean, the fact that he didn't do it right away, and the fact that, he was able to properly identify the hurt that religion was giving to society, I can't mistake, I'm not going to fault him for doing a religious purging. You know, I mean, I personally support it. I think once you get your economic base settled, you have to start forcibly changing things in the superstructure, or else, or else you can't fully maintain and grow a socialist economy, while matching with an evenly socialist, or communist, society, which is anti-religion, which is anti-idealism. So all these elements had to be purged out. So yeah, that's a great thing. Now, with Hoxha's Cultural Revolution successful, which it was a success because it was a cultural change, it was adding to the economy, and it did further socialist construction. Proof of that is, like I said, the wage ratio pretty much being abolished. They eliminated taxes in the '70s, which is after the Cultural Revolution. They were first atheistic state. They were a very, very, very modern state. So they were progressing a lot after the Cultural Revolution. Women were also officially equal in Albania with no restrictions to their lives whatsoever. Now there are some other achievements to add, because these most of these did happen post-revolution. Um, a lot of it goes to the retirement and pension of the workers, which is one of the greatest socialist policies, I have to say, for workers there is, because it's very important that you work, you get what you need, but after you retire you still get what you need for the rest of your life, pretty much. Like, you work to be taken care of, which is amazing. Some more achievements are: the population grew faster than anywhere in Europe. The life expectancy doubled from 35 in 1938 to 70, which is an 11-month period pretty much every year, if not more. The retirement was broken down into three specific categories. The first included the heavy industry and hard work laborers. The age was set for 45 years for women and 50 for men, with a required service of 15 years and 20 years respectively. It included underground workers, occupations in metallurgy, chemistry, just like the big hard laborers. Also higher ups in education, certain cultural people as well. They got the top part of this as well. The second tier included those who did less work than the first. So it's 50 years for women, 55 for men. The length of service was 20 years and 25 respectively. And these included things like the geology, tobacco, teachers, the textile industry, so on. The third and final category, the rest was 55 years and 60 for men, with the 20 to 25 years served respectively. In order to receive these pensions, though, it's sufficient when the worker was active for 3/4 of their service in one of these occupations. So they had to maintain that same job for 3/4 of their service in order to receive these pensions. Half for underground workers, because they were the heavier industry. For special categories, however, they were given even better pensions, including mothers with many children, the blind, deaf, persons with mental and physical damage. Mothers can retire within 15 years of service at like around 50. If they have more than 6 children and raise them until they're 8, as well as the blind and deaf, they can also receive it after 15 or 10 years at 40 or 50, which is 40 for women, 50 for men. Special merit jobs were for like decorated military, science, high up technology people or whatever. They were given pensions, 70% of their salary, and they had the right to pick their highest wage for 3 consecutive years within a 10-year span. As a result of the glorious construction of socialism, This was achieved in Albania in both the economy and the culture. As the worker was taken care of, they had a great economy and they were progressing at a rate that was faster than Europe, which I will post a link to kind of prove that even further. Now we got to address the collapse of Albania. I mean, we've talked about the successes and the fact that Hoxha is clearly a Marxist-Leninist, a clear architect of such, and achieved amazing things for Albania. Now here's pretty much why it ended, and it wasn't because of the mistake of not accepting more of a Western culture to progress, which could have which could have caused some problems, but we don't know that he would have, that there wouldn't have been an integration had the right successor, had been picked. But after Hoxha died, Albania got crushed under the wave of counter-revolution in the 90s. The rise of free markets around Europe, unemployment was at about 30% in Albania post Hoxha. Industry was taken over by America and were only allowed to produce prostitutes, drugs, and human trafficking. Some other small things, but they were turned pretty backwards as far as production goes. The rise of the blood feuds and the counter-revolution led by Ramiz Alia, who became a revisionist, and in 1999 he limited reforms towards capitalism. He announced an amnesty for political prisoners and allowed for multi-party elections in 1991. Now, he was imprisoned in 1994 for the genocide and human rights violations, but he was basically the guy that counter-revolted in Albania, which led to extreme backwardness, and now you have a good majority calling for Hoxhism again in Albania because of what capitalism has done. It's the same thing in Russia with them wanting Stalin because Stalin produced, gave them the best, way of life, because they both had socialism. And they're the only two that really had achieved full socialism at that time. Like I said, it goes to the mistakes I said with Hoxha, but the bunkers were justified given the context. I think it was just a little too much, so I got to give them, a little bit of, flack for that. But, also the not integrating the Western culture to try to, try to advance, which could have, which would have provided a little bit of stagnation as it grew, but given the cultural acceptance and the cultural push that Hoxha had given Albania, it's really quite justified. Now, we have to give respect to Enver Hoxha for following the Marxist-Leninist model in Albania, but who is Enver Hoxha? That's what everybody wants to know. So, Enver Hoxha was born in Gjirokastër, Albania, in October 1908. He was a teacher in 1939 and was dismissed for being a communist. He also had to go from Gjirokastër to Tirana, and whenever he was affiliated with communists, but he was exiled. I mean, he was pretty much discriminated for being a communist, an open communist. He founded the Communist Party in 1941. He was elected General Secretary in 1943. He founded the NLA, which is the National Liberation Army, in 1944. And after the liberation in 1945, the Albania Republic elected him PM, which he was until 1954. In the 80s, his state of health got even worse as he suffered from diabetes, and in 1983 he had a cerebral ischemia. I think that's how you say it. But he also had another one in 1984, and he officially died in April 11th, 1985. A little bit before that, on April 9th, he had a heart attack. They managed to revive his heart, but he fell into a coma, and then he passed away. So that's a bit about him. It's him himself. He was a very dedicated Marxist-Leninist. He started studying capital and all that whenever he was like 16, 17. His uncle got him more into communism, and then he radicalized and read anti-Düring. He read Lenin, and then he got involved with Stalin, and basically transformed as a pure revolutionary and a shining example of socialism and Marxism-Leninism, which he pretty much proves Lenin and Stalin right. Also with his analysis on finance capital, which I will post a link to. Um, I'll post a link to one of his books. If not, just the book is called On the World Crisis of Capitalism. He has a very, very, very detailed analysis of finance capital. So that's worth checking out. To wrap things up, I mean, I would like to, I would like to take this time to thank everybody who watches this video, and hopefully you guys learn some stuff. Hopefully it piques your interest to learn about Hoxha. It's not trying to change your ideal, though that would be nice. It's just to, give you a taste of, what Marxism-Leninism can actually achieve. And if you follow the guidelines of Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and Hoxha, as well as Engels, that if you follow that correct line, that we will achieve communism. And I just wanted to prove that Hoxha wasn't dogmatic. I mean, he wasn't a racist, as there was nothing even remotely racist about what he said. Jason Unruh said that that he was racist because he criticized Mao or some shit like that. But I mean, he wasn't a racist. He wasn't. I mean, he was a great leader who, after Stalin had died, had become the last Marxist-Leninist leader, and he had to fight pretty much against world revisionism and capitalism. So, I mean, for everything that he did and to become just a complete self-sufficient country is a beautiful thing. So, again, there's more to this. I'm gonna give you a link to my WordPress, and I have a bunch of essays that deal with like relations of production, the social and technical division of labor. I have more on Hoxha. I have some stuff on Mao, but I'll also link some of the places I got my research from. Big credit to Espresso Stalinist for some of the information, and then there's a couple others. But I mean, thank you guys for watching this, and I know it wasn't a great produced video. I'm not the greatest orator, and I was a bit nervous because this is my first YouTube video. But I mean, it doesn't change the fact that I'm trying to help give you guys more knowledge about Enver Hoxha. And if you want to know more, you can follow me at proletarian_stoner 1946 on Instagram. But now I'm going to end on a quote by Enver Hoxha himself, and the quote goes as follows: Marxism-Leninism is the only science which gives the revolutionary party of the working class the possibility to work out the correct political line, to define a strategic aim and task clearly, and apply revolutionary tactics and methods for their realization. So yeah, again, this has been Tanner Starika, aka Proletarian Stoner, and I'll be posting more on here. So just give a like, share, and subscribe, and follow my Instagram, and let's get this going.